What happens when a light-hearted morning interview suddenly transforms into a moment so charged that an entire studio falls silent? What happens when one carefully worded question causes a beloved actress to stop smiling, look directly across the table, and challenge the very assumption behind it? Before we dive into this story, make sure you subscribe to Prime Spotlight, hit the like button, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on celebrity interviews that become unforgettable moments. The cameras swept across the bright studio of The View as the audience applauded enthusiastically. The familiar theme music faded, and the hosts settled into their seats at the iconic table. Whoopi Goldberg smiled toward the crowd. "Good morning, everyone." The audience cheered. Joy Behar leaned forward with a grin. "Today we have one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses joining us." Sara Haines nodded enthusiastically. "A true icon of film and storytelling." Sunny Hostin added warmly, "Please welcome the wonderful Sandra Bullock." The audience rose to its feet as Sandra Bullock walked onto the stage. She waved graciously, her signature smile lighting up the room. She greeted each host warmly before taking her seat at the table. "Thank you so much for having me," Sandra said with a smile. "We're thrilled you're here," Whoopi replied. For the first several minutes, the conversation flowed easily. The hosts asked Sandra about her latest fictional film project, her decades-long career, and the experiences that had shaped her journey in Hollywood. Sandra answered thoughtfully, her voice warm and engaging. "I've been fortunate to work with incredible people," she said. "Every project teaches me something new about collaboration and storytelling." The audience applauded. Joy joked, "And somehow you've managed to make it look effortless for all these years." Laughter rippled through the studio. Sandra smiled modestly. "I promise you, it has not always felt effortless." The conversation continued comfortably. Sara asked how Sandra balanced career and family life. Whoopi asked about the emotional demands of certain roles. Sandra answered each question with humor and grace, and the audience responded warmly. Then Sunny Hostin glanced down at a note card beside her mug. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Sandra's smile remained pleasant, though she tilted her head slightly as if sensing the conversation was about to change direction. Sunny looked up. "Sandra, can I ask you something a little more personal?" Sandra smiled politely. "You can ask." The audience chuckled softly. Sunny continued. "You've spent so many years in the public eye, and people admire not only your work, but also the image you've maintained throughout your career. Do you ever feel pressure to always appear composed and positive?" The studio grew quieter. Sandra considered the question carefully. "I think anyone in the public eye feels pressure at times," she said. "But I've learned that composure doesn't mean pretending to be perfect." Sunny nodded. "So you don't feel the need to maintain a perfect image?" Sandra answered slowly. "I think the idea of a perfect image is unrealistic. People are complex and public figures are no exception." Joy listened attentively. Sara folded her hands on the table. Whoopi watched the exchange with interest. Sunny leaned forward slightly. "But audiences often expect celebrities to be polished and inspirational. Does that expectation ever become exhausting?" A murmur moved through the audience. Sandra remained composed. "It can be," she admitted, "because there's a difference between being professional and being expected to embody an idealized version of yourself all the time." The audience applauded lightly. Sunny smiled politely but continued. "Do you think celebrities contribute to that idealized image by controlling what they share publicly?" Sandra paused. The room became still. Finally, she answered. "I think everyone chooses what parts of their life they share publicly," she said. "That's true for celebrities, but it's also true for people outside the public eye." Sunny held her gaze. "But when someone has millions of fans, doesn't that choice carry extra weight?" Sandra nodded. "It can. But having influence doesn't erase a person's right to boundaries." The audience applauded more strongly. Sunny tilted her head. "So you believe celebrities should have the same right to privacy as anyone else?" Sandra answered calmly. "Absolutely. Public interest does not automatically create public ownership." A quiet "oh" moved through the audience. Whoopi raised her eyebrows slightly, impressed by the firmness of the response. Joy glanced toward Sara, who smiled thoughtfully. Sunny nodded slowly. "That's a strong statement." Sandra smiled gently. "I believe it's an important one." The audience applauded again. Sunny continued. "Some people might say that fans feel connected to celebrities because they've followed their careers for years. How do you balance that connection with personal boundaries?" Sandra folded her hands. I think gratitude and boundaries can coexist, she said. I'm deeply grateful for the support people have given me throughout my career. But gratitude doesn't require someone to surrender every aspect of their private life. The audience listened intently. Whoopi nodded. That's a fair point. Sunny smiled. I understand what you're saying. Sandra continued, her tone still warm but more deliberate. I think the healthiest relationship between a public figure and an audience is one based on appreciation, not entitlement. The audience erupted into applause. Sunny laughed softly. Well, that was a very elegant way to put it. Sandra smiled. Thank you. For a brief moment, the tension eased. But Sunny glanced down at her note card once more. The audience sensed that the conversation was not finished. Sunny looked back up. One last question, she said. The studio became quiet again. Sandra nodded politely. Go ahead. Sunny asked, do you ever worry that setting firm boundaries might make you seem distant to the people who admire you? Sandra looked directly at Sunny. Her expression remained calm, but her voice carried a quiet firmness. No, Sandra said. I believe boundaries are part of a healthy relationship. They don't create distance, they create clarity. The audience gasped softly. Then applause broke out across the studio. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. Joy nodded. Sara applauded lightly. Sunny smiled, acknowledging the strength of the response. The cameras moved in closer as the audience's applause continued. What had begun as a warm interview had become a more emotionally charged and thoughtful conversation about fame, privacy, and the boundaries between public admiration and personal space. And as the applause gradually faded, everyone in the studio could sense that the conversation was only beginning. The applause faded into a quiet murmur, but the atmosphere in the studio had changed. What had begun as a friendly celebrity interview now carried a subtle tension, the kind that made every audience member sit a little straighter and every camera operator move in just a little closer. Sandra Bullock maintained her composed smile, but her eyes remained focused on Sunny Hostin. The hosts exchanged brief glances, sensing that the conversation had entered more personal territory. Sunny cleared her throat gently. Sandra, I appreciate your perspective on boundaries, she said. But let me ask you this. Do you think celebrities have a responsibility to be more transparent with the public because their careers are built on public support? The audience grew quiet again. Sandra tilted her head thoughtfully. I think public support is incredibly important, she replied. I've been fortunate to have audiences who have supported my work for many years. But support for someone's work does not necessarily mean ownership of their private life. A few audience members nodded. Joy Behar leaned forward. So you see a distinction between public appreciation and public entitlement? Joy asked. Exactly, Sandra said. Appreciation is about valuing the work, the art, and the connection people feel through that work. Entitlement is when that appreciation turns into an expectation of access to every personal detail. The audience applauded softly. Whoopi Goldberg smiled. That's a thoughtful distinction. Sunny listened carefully. But some fans feel that sharing personal experiences makes celebrities more relatable, Sunny said. Do you think there's a balance to be struck there? Sandra nodded. Absolutely. Sharing personal experiences can create connection and understanding. But the key word is sharing. It should remain a choice, not an obligation. The audience murmured in agreement. Sara Haines added, I think that's something many people can relate to, especially in the age of social media. We all decide what parts of our lives we want to share publicly. Sandra turned toward Sara. Exactly, she said. And that choice can look different for every person. Some people are comfortable sharing a great deal, while others prefer to keep certain aspects of their lives private. Both approaches can be valid. Sunny considered this. So when you decide not to discuss certain aspects of your life publicly, what guides that decision? Sunny asked. Sandra paused for a moment. I think it comes down to protecting what matters most, she said. There are parts of life that are deeply personal, especially when they involve family, relationships, and emotional well-being. I've learned that protecting those parts is not about hiding. It's about preserving something meaningful. The audience listened intently. Whoopi nodded. That makes sense. Joy added with a smile. And honestly, most of us would probably want the same thing if our lives were under that level of scrutiny. Laughter rippled through the studio, easing the tension slightly. Sandra laughed softly. I think so too. Sunny smiled, then returned to the topic. But do you ever worry that maintaining those boundaries might make some fans feel disconnected from you? Sunny asked. Sandra's expression remained calm. I think connection can come from many places, she said. People can connect with a performance, a story, a character, or an interview. They don't need to know every private detail about my life in order to feel a genuine connection to my work. The audience applauded. Sara nodded. That's a really important point. Sunny continued. So for you, the connection with fans is rooted primarily in the work itself. Yes, Sandra replied. The work is what brought us together in the first place. If a film or a story resonates with someone, that connection is real and meaningful. It doesn't have to be built on constant personal disclosure. Whoopi smiled. That's a healthy perspective. The audience applauded again. Sunny leaned back slightly, considering her next question. Let me ask you this, she said. Do you think the media sometimes contributes to the pressure celebrities feel to share more than they want to? Sandra answered carefully. I think media can play a significant role, she said. There is often a strong appetite for personal stories, and that can create pressure. But I also think audiences are becoming more aware of the importance of respecting boundaries. Joy nodded. That's true. Conversations about privacy have changed a lot over the years. Sandra agreed. They have. And I think that's a positive development. The more we talk about boundaries, the more we normalize the idea that public figures are still entitled to personal space. The audience applauded warmly. Sunny looked thoughtful. So when you hear criticism that a celebrity is being too private, how do you interpret that? Sunny asked. Sandra smiled gently. I think it often reflects a misunderstanding of what privacy means, she said. Privacy is not rejection. It is not a lack of gratitude. It is simply the choice to keep certain parts of one's life personal. The audience murmured appreciatively. Whoopi nodded. That's a very clear way to put it. Sara added. And probably a reassuring message for a lot of people watching at home. Sandra continued. I hope so, because boundaries are not just relevant to celebrities. They are relevant to everyone. We all have the right to decide what we share and what we keep private. The audience applauded again. Sunny smiled. I think that's a powerful message. Sandra smiled back. Thank you. For a brief moment, the conversation settled into a calmer rhythm. The hosts exchanged thoughtful glances, and the audience seemed deeply engaged in the discussion. But Sunny glanced down at her note card once more. The audience sensed that the conversation was not finished. Sunny looked back up. One more question, she said. The studio became quiet again. Sandra nodded politely. Go ahead. Sunny asked. If a fan says, I feel like I know you because I've watched your films for years, how would you respond to that? Sandra looked directly at Sunny. Her expression remained warm, but her voice carried a quiet firmness. I would say that I'm grateful they've connected with my work, Sandra said. That connection is real and meaningful. But knowing my work is different from knowing every detail of my personal life. Both things can coexist without diminishing the relationship between an artist and an audience. The audience erupted into applause. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. Joy nodded. Sara applauded lightly. Sunny smiled, acknowledging the strength of the response. The cameras moved in closer as the audience's applause continued. What had begun as a discussion about fame and privacy had become a deeper conversation about respect, autonomy, and the boundaries that allow people to maintain a sense of self in a world that often demands constant access. And as the applause gradually faded, everyone in the studio could sense that the conversation was only deepening. The applause softened into a low murmur, but the energy in the studio remained unmistakably charged. The conversation had moved beyond the surface of celebrity interviews and into a deeper discussion about identity, privacy, and the expectations placed on people who live in the public eye. Sandra Bullock sat composed at the table, her hands folded lightly in front of her. Sunny Hostin regarded her with curiosity, while Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sara Haines listened attentively. Sunny spoke first. Sandra, I think a lot of viewers are relating to what you're saying, she said. But I want to ask about something that often comes up in discussions about public figures. Do you think there is a difference between being private and being perceived as distant? Sandra considered the question carefully. Yes, I do, she replied. Privacy is a choice about what you share. Distance is about emotional connection. I don't think the two are necessarily the same thing. The audience listened closely. Joy nodded. That's interesting, Joy said. So someone can maintain privacy while still being warm and connected to their audience? Absolutely, Sandra said. Connection comes from authenticity, kindness, and shared experiences. It doesn't require constant access to every detail of a person's life. The audience applauded softly. Sara smiled. That makes a lot of sense, Sara said. Most people don't share everything about themselves with the world, but they can still be very open-hearted and relatable. Sandra turned toward Sara. Exactly, she said. Relatability is not measured by how much personal information someone reveals. It's measured by whether people see something genuine and human in the way that person interacts with the world. Sunny nodded thoughtfully. So for you, authenticity is more important than constant openness? Sunny asked. Yes, Sandra replied. Authenticity means being honest about who you are, including your boundaries. If someone feels pressured to share things they are not comfortable sharing, that can actually make the interaction less authentic. The audience murmured in agreement. Whoopi leaned forward slightly. That's a powerful point, Whoopi said, because sometimes people assume that more disclosure automatically means more honesty. Sandra smiled gently. But honesty can also mean saying, "This part of my life is private," she said. That can be a very truthful statement. The audience applauded more strongly. Sunny looked intrigued. Do you think the pressure to share has increased over the years? Sunny asked. Sandra nodded. I do. The media landscape has changed dramatically. Social media, online commentary, and the constant demand for content can create the impression that people should always be available and always be sharing. Joy added with a grin. And if they're not sharing, people start inventing reasons why. Laughter rippled through the studio. Sandra laughed softly. That can happen, she admitted. And that's why it's important to remember that not every absence of information is meaningful. Sometimes it simply means a person is living their life privately. The audience applauded. Sara said, I think that's reassuring for a lot of people. We're all navigating how much of ourselves to put online. Sandra nodded. Yes, and that's why I think this conversation extends beyond celebrities. Everyone deserves the right to decide what they share and what they keep personal. Sunny considered this. So when you hear someone say, celebrities signed up for this, how do you respond? Sunny asked. Sandra paused before answering. I understand why people say that, she said. Choosing a public career does involve accepting a certain level of attention. But accepting public attention for your work is not the same as consenting to unlimited access to your private life. The audience grew quiet. Whoopi nodded. That's an important distinction. Sandra continued. I've always believed that there should be a boundary between the work I share publicly and the parts of my life that I protect privately. That boundary helps me stay grounded and maintain a sense of normalcy. Joy asked another question. Has that boundary changed as your career has evolved? Yes, Sandra replied. When I was younger, I was still learning how to navigate public attention. Over time, I became more intentional about what I wanted to protect and why. The audience listened intently. Sara added, So experience helped you become clearer about your priorities? Very much so, Sandra said. As you grow, you realize that success is important, but so are family, friendships, health, and the ability to have moments that are not defined by public scrutiny. The audience applauded warmly. Sunny smiled. That's a very grounded perspective. Sandra smiled back. Thank you. For a moment, the conversation settled into a calmer rhythm. The hosts exchanged thoughtful glances, and the audience seemed deeply engaged in the discussion. Then Sunny leaned forward again. Sandra, let me ask you something directly, she said. Do you think audiences sometimes project their own expectations onto celebrities? Sandra answered carefully. Yes, I think that can happen, she said. People may feel connected to a performer's work and then imagine they know the person behind that work. But the public version of someone is only one part of who they are. The audience murmured thoughtfully. Whoopi nodded. That's true for many public figures. Sandra continued. And I think it's important to allow public figures the same complexity we allow ourselves. We are all multifaceted. We all have public roles, private relationships, and inner lives that are not fully visible to the world. The audience applauded again. Joy smiled. You're making this sound very reasonable, Sandra. Sandra laughed. I hope so. Sunny smiled as well. I think what's making this conversation resonate is that it's not just about celebrities. It's about how all of us define our boundaries in relationships. Sandra nodded. Exactly. Boundaries are a universal part of healthy relationships. They help create trust, respect, and clarity. The audience applauded warmly. Sunny looked down at her notes, then back up at Sandra. One final thought, Sunny said. If you could tell viewers one thing about the relationship between public figures and audiences, what would it be? Sandra looked directly at Sunny. Her expression remained calm and sincere. I would say that appreciation and respect can coexist beautifully, Sandra said. You can admire someone's work, feel connected to their stories, and support their career while also respecting their right to a private life. In fact, I think that respect makes the connection healthier and more meaningful. The audience erupted into applause. Whoopi smiled appreciatively. Joy nodded. Sara applauded lightly. Sunny smiled, acknowledging the strength of the response. The cameras moved in closer as the applause continued. What had begun as a simple interview had evolved into a thoughtful and emotionally resonant conversation about boundaries, authenticity, and the ways people connect with one another in a highly public world. And as the applause gradually faded, everyone in the studio could sense that the conversation was approaching a meaningful conclusion. The applause slowly settled into a warm hum, but the atmosphere in the studio remained unmistakably charged. What had started as a cheerful morning interview had transformed into a thoughtful conversation about privacy, authenticity, and the expectations placed on public figures. Sandra Bullock sat calmly at the table, her expression composed yet reflective. Sunny Hostin looked at her with a respectful smile, while Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sara Haines exchanged thoughtful glances. Whoopi spoke first. I think this has become a much deeper conversation than any of us expected when we started, she said. And I think that's a good thing. The audience applauded. Sandra smiled. I agree, she said. Conversations like this can be uncomfortable at times, but they can also be very important. Sunny nodded. I appreciate your honesty, Sunny said. And I appreciate that you were willing to engage with these questions directly. Sandra turned toward Sunny. Thank you, she replied. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that affects not only public figures, but many people in everyday life. Sara added, I think that's why this resonated with so many people in the audience. Boundaries are something everyone has to navigate. Sandra nodded. Exactly. Whether someone is a celebrity or not, everyone has the right to decide what parts of their life they want to share and what parts they want to protect. Joy smiled. And that's probably a lesson many of us can use in the age of social media. Laughter rippled through the studio. Sandra laughed softly. Definitely. The mood lightened for a moment, but the conversation remained emotionally grounded. Sunny leaned forward slightly. Sandra, if you could leave viewers with one message about boundaries in public life, what would it be? She asked. Sandra paused thoughtfully. I would say that boundaries are not barriers to connection, she said. They are part of what makes healthy relationships possible. When we respect someone's boundaries, we create space for a more genuine and sustainable connection. The audience applauded warmly. Sandra continued. I also think it's important to remember that appreciation and respect can coexist. You can admire someone's work, support their career, and feel connected to their stories while still honoring their right to a private life. Whoopi nodded. That's a powerful message. Sunny smiled. And a very timely one. Joy added. It also reminds us that curiosity is natural, but respect is essential. The audience applauded again. Sara turned toward Sandra. Thank you for sharing your perspective so thoughtfully, Sara said. Thank you for having me, Sandra replied. I've genuinely appreciated this conversation. Whoopi smiled warmly. And we've appreciated having you here. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation. The cameras captured Sandra waving graciously, the host smiling, and the audience applauding with genuine enthusiasm. As the show moved toward its closing moments, the producers in the control room exchanged impressed glances. That was a powerful conversation, one producer whispered. Another nodded. It was intense, but it stayed respectful and meaningful. Within this fictional scenario, clips of the exchange quickly began circulating online. Viewers shared Sandra's comments about boundaries, authenticity, and the importance of respecting personal space. Some praised Sunny Hostin for asking thoughtful questions that encouraged a deeper discussion. Others applauded Sandra Bullock for responding with calmness, clarity, and emotional intelligence. Many viewers highlighted the contributions of Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sara Haines, noting how each host helped maintain a respectful and balanced conversation. Entertainment commentators within this fictional story described the interview as a rare example of a televised discussion that remained compelling without relying on shouting or sensationalism. Social media users debated the central question of the conversation. How much access should audiences expect from public figures? Some viewers agreed strongly with Sandra's emphasis on boundaries and personal autonomy. Others argued that celebrities, because of their visibility, naturally invite a certain level of public curiosity. But many agreed on one thing. The conversation had encouraged people to think more deeply about the balance between admiration and respect. Days later, fans were still discussing Sandra's line. Boundaries are not barriers to connection. The phrase became widely shared within this fictional narrative, appearing in posts, comments, and discussions about privacy, relationships, and public life. Back in the studio, as the applause faded and the cameras prepared to cut away, Sunny looked at Sandra one last time. "Thank you for this conversation," Sunny said sincerely. Sandra smiled warmly. "Thank you for asking the questions." The audience applauded once more as the closing music began to play. The screen slowly faded to black. And then one final message appeared for viewers. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the conversation between Sandra Bullock and Sunny Hostin in this scenario? Share your opinion in the comments below, and let us know which moment stood out to you the most. And if you want more stories, dramatic moments, and entertaining narratives, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Prime Spotlight, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.